Yeah, hopefully the Queensland Reds will bring it home one day. I still remember 2011. So, look, my conscience is the last session before beers, so I'll do my best to make it interesting. About 5 people have threatened me, said if I don't make it interesting, they're going to have words with me. So what am I here to do today is to talk about a shift that's taking place in safety in the mining industry and share some of the principles that sit behind that shift. I think we'll all agree, probably now is the most opportune time to sit back and reflect, is there anything else we can do differently around the way we do safety in our industry? And the answer to this question is yes, definitely this can be applied in the mining industry. So I'd like to introduce you to Brad, married to Celeste, got a young boy, Jared, and a young daughter, Annabelle. Recently relocated from Sydney up to Mackay and has started work with AJ Contractors, based out of Mackay. And AJ Contractors think he's a superstar, gets along well with people, is going to go places within that organisation. And it's his second day out on site, out at Johnson Coal Mine, out in the Bowen Basin there. And the particular task he's required to do is changing out conveyor rollers. So on this particular day, their supervisor's away, and so what was a crew of 3 is now down to a group of 2. And what needs to happen is obviously Brad's done his death by PowerPoint online induction, knows that we've got some cardinal rules, we need to isolate and test for dead before we do any particular task. And so Brad's going to lead the isolation to do this task. So there are some complexities for Brad, being the isolation point, working on a different conveyor for this particular day, and it's a complex conveyor system. So Brad's a bit reluctant, not quite sure, but he doesn't want to actually ask people for any help, and there's a few reasons for that. So one, there's some production pressure there. He's been informed that there is some time pressure when this conveyor gets back up and running again. Another part is he remembers from his induction that, if it's not right, speak up. However, everything he's seen from the behaviours and what people have been saying, both employees and contractors, isn't actually supporting that. And in fact, one of the contractors actually said to him, mate, it's just lip service. As long as you get the job done, they'll pretty much turn a blind eye. And the last aspect there is around, he's actually been treated pretty poorly from the permanent staff there on site. So Brad proceeds with the isolation, isolates, tests for dead, the conveyor doesn't run, they go off and start their work. What Brad didn't know is it actually isolated the wrong conveyor. A different work group had already isolated, were doing their work, they finished their work partway through the shift, removed their locks, walked the conveyor prior to starting back up, and they find Brad and his co-worker working on a live or unisolated conveyor. So how would your organisation respond to this type of incident? What would be your response? And as part of that response, what would happen to Brad? And is that the way that we can sort of move safety forwards within the industry? So what I'm going to talk about today is maybe looking at a different way of how your organisation can respond to these types of incidents and showing some of the principles that sit behind it. So as I said, there's a definite shift taking place in safety, and what we're seeing, it's a shift from a traditional view through to a new view of safety. And it's not about throwing out what's come before, it's more about, well, let's take what's really working really well, as opposed to what's happening now in this traditional way, and let's see, well, what else can we do? What can we add to that? And like any change, there's going to be innovators and early adopters. They're the types of organisations that we work with. And then there'll be late change adapters and potentially change resistors. And the question to you, the change is happening, it's going to happen, it's already happened in other industries. It's where you or where your organisation is going to sit on that curve. So outlined here are some principles that sit behind this new view of safety, or simplified safety principles. So you can see they're not actions, they're not strategies, they're not techniques, they're principles, which depending on your organisation is how these might be fit. Today, all I'm going to have time to talk about very briefly is the ones there highlighted in green, and these are what have come out of the Safety Differently ethos, if you have been following that or seen some of that. So safety is the presence of positives, not the absence of negatives. Really think about that. How do you currently measure safety in your organisation? Is there any positives at all in terms of measures? And if the current way you're doing that, again, is that setting you up to really move forward into the future? So think about a maintenance task that might be performed in a workshop at your site. And like any task, it'll end up on a continuum of intended outcome to unwanted outcome. In this case, is an incident. So hands up, if 50% of times when this maintenance task happens, it results in an incident. No one? What about 25%? 10%? Put your hand up if you think it's a number less than 10% would happen as a result of an incident. Yep, a few begrudging hands. So here's one key takeaway of how you can improve your safety learning by up to 99%, and you don't need anything to do it, don't need new computers or anything like that. So pretty much the literature shows that less than 1% of time things go wrong, which means that 99% of the time things are going right. But in that going right, it's more difficult than planned, or it could be executing according to plan, or we actually get a really good surprise and that one actually went way better, way easier than expected. So where do you devote your time, effort and resources to learn? Is it in the 1% or is it in the 99%? Obviously you can work out what to do next. So the opportunities there is tapping into the 99%. Another interesting thing is what about if to get from where you are to where you want to be or progressing forward, it required us to focus on these higher order goals and actually developing these: trust, care, commitment, hope, many others that sit in and amongst that as well. Again, the literature shows that organisations that have well-developed higher order goals have well-performing safety. So let's think about this for a minute. Think about one of the most successful safety programs and safety implementations you've ever been a part of. And now thinking that through, was that program successful because of the program in and of itself? Or was it successful because it developed one or more of these higher order goals? Or was it successful because of the fact that there was already one or more of these higher order goals already present in your organisation and it simply tapped into that and leveraged off that? I mean, look at the safety resets at the moment. Have they been successful or well received because of part of these higher order goals? So for those that do like some tactical things, here are some things you might want to consider. I think the key thing is how can you tap into the 99%? How can you tweak some of your strategies right now to learn from that? Is there some redeployment of effort and time to look at that? Another interesting thing is, are we willing to venture into the area of putting higher order goals into our objectives and targets? So things that we can't easily quantify, but we know actually add value. Are we willing to venture into that territory? Okay, the next theme, or principle. People are the solution, not the problem. And Dr. Tristan here made reference to this earlier. Key one to get your head around. And how do we know this? I mean, look at the last 2 years of safety innovations that have come through this and the organisations that put them forward. Look at what we saw yesterday. Think about all the stuff that's coming out of your safety resets at the moment. The ideas are there. It's coming out from the ground. People know what needs to be done. It's how can you tap into that and harness that and actually do something about it. An interesting question for yourselves is how do you view your people at the moment? Do you view them as enabling safety, understanding that there's a difference between what work is done and what the procedure says they do or should be done, and they've got to deal with that gap day in, day out? Or do you see them from the perspective, well, they're the cause of incidents, and if we didn't have people, we wouldn't have incidents? Okay, so here's a quick activity. So I want you to think about what you do out in the field to talk to people, so maybe safety observations appears to be a theme at the moment. The question I'd like you to answer and talk to the person beside you for 30 seconds is, what would you do differently to demonstrate that you cared for that person within that mechanism? So you've got 30 seconds, and I'll tell you to swap over. So you can start now. Okay, that's time. That's time. We'll have to pull that up there. If everyone can come on back. Everyone done? All right, sorry, I know that was really, really quick, but I'm sure you can see just in that small 30-second window, if you ask the right question, you can see how you can take an existing strategy, tweak it a little bit, and potentially tap into these things like high rate of goals or learning from the 99%. That's what we're proposing here. You don't have to throw everything out, it's just how can you change the lens. So some other specific actions which could be applied, a real bugbear for mine is around the safety language that we use on site. If we think about people as a solution, look at our language that we use. How much is it geared that they're the problem? We've got to fix them. Is there an opportunity to do a review of that? Quick one to touch on. So safety is an ethical responsibility to those that perform the work on the front line, not a bureaucratic activity. Now, if you asked your supervisors that, how do you think they would answer? What would they perceive? Everyone's busy. I get it. I've been there. One particular model you could think about is around that operational safety is comprised of 4 buckets, and it's about how much time and effort you're putting into the different buckets. So think about if you responded to Brad's incident, how much time and effort goes into communications, incident reports, investigations, data collection, blah, 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 versus the physical safety. So they're on the ground, out in the isolation, they're out in the conveyors. Versus how much time do we spend on demonstrating safety? So we've got to talk to the department, this is what we've done. We've got to talk to our group people, this is what we've done. Versus, again, how much do we do on the physical safety side of things? So there are ways you can slice and dice this up. So I've talked about a few different themes and principles. There is one strategy that you can employ that can bring some of these things together. So what if there was a way that you could develop collaborative working relationships with your unions and key suppliers and major contractors and people in different levels of your organisation. Ways in which you can grow these higher order goals. Tapping into the workforce, those people are running around 30 years, 25 years before they retire. Leveraging off what's working well. Well, there is a strategy. It's called appreciative inquiry, not enquiry, so inquiry. And it's an evidence-based organisational improvement process. We've adapted it for mining industry and around enabling safety change. And you can see here it's used by a few organisations that you might have heard of around the traps. And what it is, it's the study of what's working well. So let's think about this. So instead of me standing up on the crew and saying, all right, tell me what's wrong, and I'll stand there and they give me everything that's wrong, and then we put in actions to bring us back to here. We stand there and say, okay, well, tell me what's right, and how can we leverage off that and take ourselves forward? And we have this gulf in terms of strategies. And think about the difference in energy levels between when you're talking about what's wrong, where do we need to go, versus what's right, and where can we take this? This is what AI is all about, or AI for short. So there's a bit of a model here, which I'm going to briefly run through. I invite you to think about what's one of your current safety challenges or issues that you have, and see how that might play out when we follow this cycle around. So the first step is around developing your positive core. Think of the tree trunk that gives the branches that support this whole process. So every organisation has strengths. We wouldn't be organisations or working if we didn't. It's by talking to the different people we actually harness and identify what these strengths are. And the interesting thing is, what you think the strength is of the organisation will probably be different to what someone else in the organisation thinks your organisational strengths are. So obviously, it's the more people we can talk to as part of this, we identify what's this core here. And listed below is an example question which could be asked at this stage, one of many. So we identify the positive core, and then we take our problem or challenge, and we develop an affirmative topic. You can see listed here are some criteria around developing an affirmative topic. Two things stand out. So it's a group-driven. It's not the safety manager, it's not the GM, it's not the head of safety, it's a group. So what forms the group? One, or the organisations that do this well, take a very good vertical slice, take a horizontal slice, plus then look at the other external stakeholders. This is where you can tap into unions or contractors or suppliers or anyone else as part of that to form that group. Then the other aspect you see down there, it's how you frame this. So in this particular example, where we had the workforce doesn't challenge their peers, can actually be reframed into, well, safety leadership at every level. So how could your particular challenge be reframed to actually be pushed through this? So I've got our positive core, developed our affirmative topic, then we go and do, again, through a series of interviews and storytelling, what are we doing really, really well in relation to this topic? We uncover, learn about and appreciate. So we talk to as many people as possible within the organisation to get interviews and storytelling. Out of that will come some key themes which says we're doing this really, really well in relation to this topic. And listed below here is an example, if we're thinking about safety leadership, a type of question that can be asked at this stage. So we've got our positive core, identified our topic, said this is what we're doing really, really well. The next step is, well, where can we take this? What's possible? How can we vision this into something way better than what we currently have? Again, talking to lots of people engaged in the group, and the bottom there is an example question, or one of the many types of questions that could be asked as part of this process. So really taking the blinkers off, where can we take this? Then once we said, well, this is what we're doing really well, this is where we can take it, we have to be able to articulate this into what does this look like in our ideal organisation if we've nailed this, which is where the concept of capability statements come out. We bring this all together, which is the vision for this particular aspect of what it's going to look like in our organisation. Again, obviously a facilitated process to get there. Then the last step in the cycle around is the execution. So we take these capability statements and then we work out, well, what are the strategies that we're going to do to deliver that particular vision? Now, the neat thing about AI, it's not a directive thing around who does what. The group actually determines, based on their passions, their interests, they self-govern who wants to work on what. They actually develop, what should we do? How should this look like? And the bottom here is an example of maybe a crew-defined, implemented, managed safety leadership forum. And that's the final step in the process there. So I've covered off a fair bit of content very quickly. Things like tapping into the 99%, safety is a positives, higher order goals, reducing bureaucracy, the AI process. And it's all designed to share these principles around what could be a different response for your organisation for these types of incidents, other incidents out there. As I said, there's a definite shift taking place within the industry, and it's up to you, where you want to sit on that change curve. So, as you can see, I'm pretty passionate about this. Here's my contact details. If you want to call, email, happy to have the conversation. That's about all I want to say on that in the time we've got left. So thank you very much. Appreciate your time.
Great, thanks very much, Christian. We are just trying to find out what that vibration is that's going through the building at the moment. If we do hear, we'll let you know. In the meantime, any questions for Christian? Microphone? Yeah, Tom.
Christian, thank you. That was very interesting. Can I just ask you to come down to a minutiae for a moment? Let's assume that in this organisation...
Sorry, can we just have that a little louder? I just can't quite hear.
Let's assume, Christian, that we're in an organisation, there is a negative outcome, so some sort of event. How do you actually investigate or deal with that event using the model or the principles that you've been talking to us about it?
Yep.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it does. Excellent. And I was just having a chat with a colleague, Dr. Tristan, over here. So one of the things out there's learning teams or learning events, which actually are applied to incidents, if you like. So the vernacular is different. The ethos is different and the framework that's applied, which again is designed to build in these themes. So still to facilitate a learning aspect and the learning process to uncover, similar, if you like, but the way we go about it, free from blame and all that sort of stuff is part of it. So I know that's definitely one aspect that can be applied there, and there's organisations already doing that.
Any other questions for this afternoon? Okay, well, please thank Christian for this afternoon's presentation.
Thank you.